Okay. Show me.
Hi there guys, welcome back to the Dutch ESC channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. And what you see here is a Diatone Taycan C3 Cinewhoops. Yeah, this is a Cinewhoops camera, quadcopter. Right, and you've seen the title of this video. In this video I'm gonna present you with the tune I ended up with for this quadcopter. Now, Diatone actually sent me this quadcopter together with the 6S version of it to tune for them. They actually haven't even asked me to do videos about the quadcopters, but as a service to my viewers, I will present you with tunes for both of these quadcopters. And in this video I'm gonna present you with the 4S tune, or the tune for the 4S version. I'm gonna do that in separate videos to keep the videos reasonably short. And also the tune for the 4S version is different from the 6S version, definitely. So it makes no sense to present them in one go, in one video. Right, also I didn't want to put this into the review because there's two tunes and would just take too long in the review video. Right, I hope that makes sense. So, the Taycan C3 3494 for 4S. And it doesn't come with an action camera, as you probably know. And this is the, what is this? The bind and fly, plug and fly version. So it comes without a receiver. I think there's a version with a receiver. Otherwise, the quadcopter is completely the same. Also, this is the analog version, but the tune will and the setup will also work on the digital, the Vista version. Won't make any difference at all. So, what more do I need to tell you? Yeah, I flew the quadcopter with the stock propellers. I think these are Gemfan 3-inch, obviously, wind dancer propellers, 325 propellers, the stock propellers. And also this is the latest version of the Taycan with the new Toka motors, the silvery grey one-piece bell motors. Yeah, I don't have a previous version, an old version of the Taycan 3, so this is the version I tuned. And also, I made this tune so that the quadcopter can be flown freestyle mildly. Diatone actually asked me because a lot of their customers want to fly a quadcopter like this freestyle. I don't know why. I don't see why you'd want to fly a quadcopter like this freestyle. Regardless, I've made the tune so that you can obviously fly the quadcopter cinematic, but mild freestyle maneuvers will definitely be possible and the quadcopter will pull them off well. And I always strive or try to make the tunes as easy as possible and without firmware updates and such. In this case, that's not possible, regrettably. You definitely need to upgrade, for instance, the firmware on the 4-in-1 ESC, and I've also updated the firmware on the flight controller. Yeah, again, in this case, it definitely wasn't possible to make a good tune, to make the quadcopter fly well, with cool motors. In case you have this quadcopter and you run into problems with the motors getting hot, this tune, this setup will solve that. But for that, you need to upgrade firmwares. Speaking of, let's get into the first firmware you need to update, and that's for the 4-in-1 ESC. Okay, the firmware I've gone with is the Jazz Maverick 4-in-1 ESC firmware, and this is obviously for BL Heli S ESCs. I've gone with this firmware, and specifically the 48 kHz version of the 16.77, because it's both stable and this version will keep your motors cool. Also, it will make your quadcopter fly better. Maybe that's the first reason for picking this firmware. But you actually picked the 48 kHz version to keep your motors cool. And there's another thing to that, which I'll show you in a second. Also, I won't be showing you how to flash firmware onto your 4-in-1 ESC or your flight controller. There are, for instance, articles from Oscar Liang about that. Go look it up. Flash firmware on 4-in-1 ESC. You'll find lots of articles, or search for Jazz Maverick ESC firmware, and again there will be web pages and videos about how to flash firmware onto your 4-in-1 ESC, and the same goes for Betaflight, obviously. So let me see again, the 48 kilohertz version, and then hex file 16.77. And from this page, I'll leave a link to this page in the description down below, so you won't have to look for it. Then on this page you need to look for the file C_H_40_48, and then, well, you'll automatically end up at revision 16.77, because this entire page is about that version. So yeah, also the name of the file will be in the description down below, so you can't pick the wrong one. And yeah, definitely make sure that you pick the right firmware version, otherwise things won't work out very well. Then let me see, after flashing my 401 ESCs, things should look like this. As you can see, all my ESCs have version 16.77 to them. Also C-H-40. Let me see. You can't see in this screen in the BL Heli configurator what kilohertz version you picked, regrettably. But yeah, so definitely again make sure you pick the right version. And the other change I've made in this screen is the startup power on your top left, the 0.38. I think the stock value is 0.50 or close to 0.50. I've lowered that, and that'll help to keep your motors cool a little bit more. Also, in freestyle flying it might prevent flips of death, even though I've had no flips of death with this quadcopter, but it will help regardless. And this quadcopter definitely also doesn't need that startup power to be 0.5 or 0.50. Okay, and that's everything. Again, flash the 401 ESC with the right firmware obviously, and change that startup power to 0.38, and that's everything for BL Heli. Then we move to Betaflight, and let me see, I have again changed or updated the Betaflight firmware to 4.2.6, which at least was the latest version when I went and tuned these quadcopters. It's a reasonably recent version of Betaflight, as you know. Okay, so here you see the port step of my quadcopter, and yeah, this is the analog version, right? So my UART1 is for serial RX, or the receiver, S-Bus receiver, and then on the UART3 I've got the VTX, the video transmitter, and if you have the digital version, your port setup will be different. It will help you out to make screen prints of everything before you update the firmware. I always do. And also make a CLI dump. Anyway, if you also have the analog version, this is what your port step should look like. Then the configuration, what have I changed here? I've changed D-Shot, the motor ESC protocol, to D-Shot 300. I think the base setting was D-Shot 600, definitely not needed, and switching back to D-Shot 300 will help your processor out. Your processor will have a harder time running the RPM filtering, so every little bit helps. And again, there's no benefit to using D-Shot 600 in quadcopters like this. So D-Shot 300 it is. Bidirectional D-Shot is enabled. Then you definitely need to make sure that your motor pulse is set correctly. Should be 12. I've set the motor idle throttle to 6.5, slightly higher than stock. And the pit loop frequency to 4. And is that it for this screen? Let's see. I have disabled soft serial. I'm not sure if it was switched on by default. I think it was, and it's definitely not needed. I don't have the Taycan version with the LEDs, so by default it was switched on, so disable that. And that is it. Yeah, that's it for the configuration. Then a very important screen. If you end up not updating the firmware on the flight controller, that might work out perfectly fine. However, you definitely need to copy my PID tune you see on this screen here. I've used the sliders. I always try for tunes I present on my channel to use the sliders because it makes it easier to copy a tune, right? So let me tell you what the values there are. The master multiplier is set to 1.2. PD balance is 0.8, the PND gain is 1.1 and the stick response gain is 0.9. Then I've changed the feed forward transition to 0.4. Have I changed that? I think I've changed it. And I've altered or enabled the VBUT PID compensation. I have not for the 6S version. But typically on 4S quadcopters you'll have some voltage sag at the end of your run. So on the 4S version you definitely do want to enable VBUT PID compensation. Again on the 6S version, but I'll do a separate video on that. And let me see, on the stock version I think the anti-gravity gain was higher. I have not found that to be necessary. So that's everything for the PID page. Then here are my rates, and my rates are typically high. Probably if you want to fly this quadcopter cinematically you want lower rates. You definitely do want expo. I've used 0.35 on all axes. You might want to experiment with higher expo on a cinematic quadcopter, but definitely lower your rates if you want to fly the quadcopter cinematically. However, this is a personal thing, so you might want to leave this stock and see what that feels like to you. And then the filters. I think the filtering was set very conservatively for this quadcopter, like below 1. So both of these sliders were set further to the left stock. I'm not completely sure, but I'm pretty sure. So I ended up with 1.1 for both the gyro filter manipulator and the Diatone filter manipulator. That worked out fine. I've tried higher and lower values. This is the ideal setup for this quadcopter, at least mine. Oh, and I should add that my tune worked out. Oh, and I should add that this tune worked out well for a quadcopter with a 1300 4S, 1300 mAh 4S and an action camera. Doesn't matter all that much which action camera. In fact, it flies a little bit better with heavier. But most of the flights I did with this 4S version were with this GoPro Session 5. And yeah, again, the tune I just showed you worked out well for this quadcopter, the 4S version, with a 1300 mAh 4S and an action camera. And that is basically it. I'll leave you actually with one of the flights with this quadcopter. I'm not sure actually which I'll include in this video. Probably a semi-freestyle flight with this quadcopter. So let me know in the comment section below what you think of the tune. Also, if you end up flying the quadcopter with a bigger LiPo or a smaller LiPo, or maybe even without an action camera, the tune will be a better start-off point or base point than the stock setup. So there's no harm in setting up your quadcopter with the tune and settings I just showed you. There you go. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. Again, I'll leave you with the rest of this flight and catch you in the next video. Bye bye.